Well, hello, friends, and welcome to the 80th edition of the Christian Friends of EMUNAH Israel webinar. It's hard to believe that we've done 80 episodes of this, but we're grateful for those of us who have been on the journey from the very beginning, and lots of things are going on. And the original desire, of course, was keeping people up to date with all that was happening with everything that was going on in Israel with October 7th and the unfolding of that. And thankfully, all of those hostages of blessed memory and are back in Israel, and we've been celebrating that, as I'm sure you all have, as we watch people take those yellow pins off of their suits over various media outlets. Well, a lot is going on globally, and Netanyahu should be arriving in the next hour or so if he's not landed already. He has flown for the seventh time to the White House for urgent meetings with President Trump in the midst of everything else that's going on with the military buildup around Iran. If you missed the Israel Matters episode last week, we had Khosrow Isfahani on that, which you can find on YouTube. Just search for at Israel Matters, and he talked about everything that's been going on the ground in Iran. January 8th and 9th, there was 36,000 people that were butchered by the regime there. And I pointed out during that time, it's an interesting contrast when you look at what has taken place with the IDF acknowledging that 70,000 people did die in Gaza, but that was over the course of 852 days. And yet in Iran, 36,000 people died in 2 days. And where are the Greta Thunbergs and where are all of those demonstrating on the streets for the brutality of what's gone on in Iran in contrast to Gaza? Seemingly there is a double standard at play, but you, friends, are all aware of that and know what is going on. So it will be interesting to see what comes out of the meeting between Netanyahu and Trump this time. There have been discussions. I know that the deployment of THAAD missile systems have taken place in certain bases across Iraq and the Middle East region. I've seen pictures of submarines off of Diego Garcia, American submarines that the Russians have been taking. So there is a lot of build up around that, and all the while, what does also seem to be very interesting is the maneuvering of Erdogan, the Turkish president, and the way in which he is courting various other nations. He's actually said that he is considering entering the nuclear arms race to be a counterbalance to what's going on, so called. He's been meeting with Somalia and various others, and you see these different jigsaw pieces going into play. Another interesting thing. Is of course during the Olympics, which are the Winter Olympics, which are taking place in Italy at present, and the opening ceremony. And I don't know if any of you watched any of it, but there are two times when there are major booing in the crowd, and the first one is Israel. Unfortunately, that is the reality. There was a lot of booing there. It was a small contingency of Israeli athletes there, and the second time was when JD Vance and the Americans were entering into the stadium. It seems that there is a global dislike for those seeking to secure peace for the Western world. And a lot of the Western world doesn't realize that Israel has been fighting for the freedom of the West for the past, well, decades, I should say, but because they understand what they are facing, and the rest of the world hasn't yet caught up to that reality. So, those of you who are living in Israel, thank you for being involved in recognizing evil and seeking to deal with it, difficult as it may be, and having friends that have been involved in that battle, personal friends that have been in reserve duty for literally hundreds of days, and who I would normally see every year. NRB next week are not coming because they've got work to be doing on the ground at home. Well, as always, we like to start our time together by looking at a scripture, and this week is no different. And we're going to go to 1 Chronicles 23, verse 28 through 31. And this ties in to our very special guest that we have, who has a quite a story and quite a craft that he's going to be sharing with us. Well, the duty of the Levites, this is 1 Chronicles 23, 28 through 31. The duty of the Levites was to help Aaron's descendants in the service of the temple of the Lord, the Beit Hamikdash, to be in charge of the courtyards, the side rooms, the purification of all sacred things, and the performance of other duties at the house of God. They were in charge of the bread set out on the table, the special flour for the grain offerings, the thin loaves made without yeast, the baking and the mixing, and all measurements of quantity and size. They were also to stand every morning to thank and praise the Lord. They were to do the same in the evening. And whenever burnt offerings were presented to the Lord on the Sabbaths, at the new moon feasts, and at the appointed festivals, they were to serve before the Lord regularly in the proper number and in the way prescribed for them. You can have a guess of who we're going to have in a few moments, but before that, Melissa and Ruth have something that we want to talk to you about that is launching um, imminently, I should say.
Yes, this is a very big day for Christian Friends of EMUNAH. This is something that we've been hinting at the last month or so of a new program that we're launching today, and that is the Guardian Angel Child Sponsorship Program, where we are inviting Christian Friends of EMUNAH to now sponsor a specific child at EMUNAH has 5 residential homes, but at the moment there's 2 residential homes that are going to be participating in this. But hopefully, all of those children will get sponsored, and there'll be the need to move to the other homes as well. Stephen has up on the screen the tab now that's available. If you go to emunahangels.org, you'll see along the top, emunahangels.org/become a guardian angel, and you can see that on the tab there. Hopefully. Stephen will put the link in the chat as well. But I'm going to invite Ruth into the conversation. She's been working really hard with the staff at these 2 residential homes to make this possible. These are real children in EMUNAH's programs. And as Stephen will show you in a minute when we scroll down on the page, these children are in under EMUNAH's care because of court orders due to severe abuse or neglect or abandonment. And so because of that, EMUNAH is not able to show a full frontal picture of their face for their own privacy and protection. But these are photos of real children and their real names and real ages. And Ruth, what else would you like us to know about this program that's launching?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Melissa and Stephen, as always, for doing your thing. I think one of the most important things is that this is an opportunity for all of you who have a heart and soul for the Jewish people and for the children of Israel who have suffered so much to give them that little extra. Because even though Emunah and the Ministry of Social Service and Welfare in Israel takes care of the children and gives them the basics. Each time a child is brought into one of our 5 homes, we are given a stipend per child, obviously from the ministry. But those extra things, the things like buying a birthday present or buying a new outfit for the high holiday period, or even for their bar or bas mitzvah period, giving them something special that they can go to camp and sign up, things that are not in the everyday budget all the time. These are things that this sponsorship, your guardianship, your ability to say, hey, you're sponsoring a young person and you're making it happen for the next year. And you're making sure that this person will have a birthday present, will have that little extra something if he or she wants to take an extra sports, do swimming or basketball or soccer, and we have to pay for it. This enables it. And it's a commitment for 12 months. It comes to, in American dollars, approximately $40 a month, which we're going to do in 1 or 2 payments, which is going to be $480 one payment, or it can be split in half. But that's a decision we made. What will happen is what you will receive beyond the blessing and the good feeling of taking care of children here and knowing that you're giving them that extra bit, because many of these children do not have families they can go home to. They are orphans or they are abused or abandoned. They're dealing and they're struggling so much. So you will have the benefit, the bracha, the honor of helping take care of these children, but also you will receive a personal write-up of each child when you sign up. You'll get their picture, you'll get their birthday, you'll get a letter from them that will have been translated because they'll be writing in Hebrew and we'll have it translated. And then you'll be able to correspond. It'll be 2 correspondents from you and from them per year. And it's really such a beautiful thing. And again, it is a new thing, as Melissa said, and we are hoping that it will be successful. We already know that a few people have signed up, and we are blessed to know that there are people who really care enough to do this.
Yes, we're so excited. Stephen and I are sponsoring a child. I was just talking with our 12-year-old daughter and see that there's a 12-year-old child that whose profile is ready to be sponsored. And she was thinking it'd be fun to get paired with a girl her own age. And I hope that all of you will really think and pray and consider this as well. As Ruth mentioned, there's a family on the call already that is our first official sponsors, and we're really thankful for them. And I know some of the other members of the Christian Friends of EMUNAH leadership team have expressed a desire either to have their church sponsor a specific child, or maybe your small group or Bible study could sponsor a specific child, or your family, or even to have your children do it and have it be a fundraiser. I know with our children before, we've done bake sales and other fundraisers for EMUNAH projects, and that could be a really fun thing to engage with your whole family with. So I'm hoping that on this call, we can even get all of these children sponsored, and that we can keep Ruth and the team at EMUNAH very busy making more profiles because
Thanks.
the demand is so high.
What people should do is definitely write to me, Ruth at worldemunah.org, and I'll be in touch with everyone within the next few days, and we will work that out. But one of the things that we had talked about also on the leadership team, we all have friends that we love, or parents or family members that are either celebrating a birthday or an anniversary, and we're always saying, they have everything. What more can I really buy them? Another little vase or another candy dish, enough already, or even flowers. But this is something that you might want to consider because it is very special, and I think they will be so moved. And it might be something just to consider for those special people in your lives when you're not sure what to get them. So,
Absolutely. So Stephen's just put the links in the chat for all of us to see. At the bottom there's the Become a Guardian Angel, EMUNAH's child sponsorship program. And I really encourage you to pray and consider this. If it's too much for you to do alone, to find a friend or group that maybe you can do this as a project together. And Ruth's email address is there. She's definitely the one if you have any questions about how this is going to work, or have a request of a certain age and gender of a child to be matched with, maybe that's the same age as your child or grandchild. Ruth's definitely the one to talk to about that. Anything else you wanted to add about the Guardian Angel program, Ruth?
No, but I do think you should know that the 2 homes that we are working from is Achuzat Sarah, which is located in Bnei Brak community, and they have approximately 73 children that live with them full-time, 7/24. And then the other is the Neve Landi home for boys, which is a very special, unique residential home in all of Israel because it's exclusively for young boys who have shown a lot of mental health issues very, very early on, and putting them into this home and into the special environment with therapeutic support, and that enables them not to be institutionalized. And that's a very, very important thing for these young boys because it really gives them a future. So I think these are the 2 homes we're starting with. We do have 5, as Melissa mentioned, but we'll start with these 2 and see how it goes.
Amazing. Thank you, Ruth. Well, this is just such a practical way that you can show your love and support to Israel in a really meaningful way, and how wonderful for these children to know that they have Christian friends all over the world that care about them and want to support them in this way. So definitely look into that. And now we have a short video before I introduce our very, very special guest. And this is about the Showbread Institute, and it is fascinating what is done there. So let's watch this, and then I'll introduce our guest.
Welcome to Saidel's Breads of the Beit Hamikdash baking workshop. Today we're going to be baking different kinds of breads that they baked in the Beit Hamikdash. We're going to be seeing them with our own eyes. We're going to be touching them, smelling them, feeling them, eating them and baking them with our own hands, which is completely different to just reading about them theoretically in the Chumash and the Gemara. קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו להפריש כללה מן העיסה.
Experience this afternoon. It was so nice to see everything about the temple and the Mikdash.
This is such a great time. Wonderful people from all over the world learning more about the Beit Hamikdash.
The workshop was incredibly informative. It gives you a feeling of having participated in something connected with the Beit Hamikdash, which to a Jew is immeasurable, and it gives a special feeling like as if we were actually building it.
You must come and try it.
Amazing. I would love to do that experience with my kids. The Beit Hamikdash is the Hebrew way to refer to the temple. And we have an expert here today to tell us more. Eliezer Meir Saidel is a South African-born master artisan baker. As you can tell, that video made me feel hungry. Is CEO of the Jewish Baking Center in Karnei Shomron, Israel, and managing director of the Showbread Institute, dedicated to researching the legendary Lechem HaPanim, otherwise known as the showbread in English, from Solomon's Temple. So a warm welcome to you, Eliezer. Thank you for joining us today.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And I'm sure most of you know Ruth Guggenheim. She is the director of interfaith relations for EMUNAH Israel, and she will be interviewing Eliezer today.
Thank you, Melissa. Shalom, Eliezer. How are you?
Shalom, very well. Thank you. Thanks. Thanks for having me on your show.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. First of all, I have to apologize. I found that second video. You had sent us another one, but I found that later this afternoon. I said, oh my gosh, this is an amazing video, a little longer than the one you sent. So I hope you don't mind.
I looked a lot younger then. It was about 15 years ago, that video.
Is that why you have a beard now? Okay. But it's an amazing video. Thank you so much for joining us. I know for myself, and most likely most people on the show, really, we know very, very little about the whole showbread, the Lechem HaPanim that was made in the temple time and eaten. We're going to get into that. But before we learn a little bit about the actual background of that, we'd like to learn a little bit about you. Like, number one, where you come from, South Africa, right?
I'm originally from South Africa, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Johannesburg. So when did you come to Israel, you and your family, and what inspired you to start the actual institute?
So I was born in South Africa in 1965. I lived in South Africa till I was age 20. My parents were religious Jews, and it was our upbringing that we were brought up with a Zionist education and upbringing, and it was always the end plan that we would eventually make Aliyah to Israel. So when I finished college at the age of 20, I made Aliyah before my family. I was a kind of a pioneer. I came a year before the rest of my family came, and they joined me a year later, and we moved to Jerusalem. I was still single at the time, and I just finished a degree in physics. Actually, an interesting transition from being a physicist to a baker. Most people don't do it that way around. Instead of working in physics, I began working in computer programming for about 25 years in Israel. I worked in high tech in computers until I reached my mid-40s. By then I was already married with 4 kids. And I had a kind of a midlife crisis, like a lot of people do in their mid-40s. And I decided to ditch the high-tech profession and go back to my childhood passion, which was baking.
Wow. That is an interesting journey anyway. So you like baking as a child. Had you learned to bake standard challah, standard, Shabbos bread when you were a kid?
So when I was a kid, my mother used to do professional catering. She was a caterer. So I got introduced to food from a very early age. But interestingly enough, she was never a bread baker. She never used to bake bread. She used to bake the most wonderful cakes and biscuits and cookies. I don't know if we have an American audience or a British audience, or both, cookies and biscuits, whichever you'd want to choose. She was an incredible pastry chef. And she got me interested in food from a very young age. But my love for bread baking began when I was bar mitzvah age. I had a teacher in school who used to teach us religious studies, and he was a kind of a health nut. He used to run marathons, and he used to eat his whole grain bread that he ground himself, hand ground his own whole grain flour. And one day I asked him to taste a piece of the sandwich, which I'd never seen bread like that. In the 1970s in South Africa, all you could find was white bread. You never saw whole wheat bread anywhere. So I tasted it and I fell in love with it from first bite. And I began copying he became a kind of a mentor to me. I started running, I started jogging, and I started baking my own whole grain bread. And that's what got me hooked on baking. It was a kind of a passion for me when I was a teenager. And when I finished my 12th grade, instead of following the passion like I should have done, I followed the dollar signs and I went into the high-tech industry. And I corrected that area when I was in my mid-40s and opened a bakery.
So, you came true to yourself. That's amazing. But, one of the things you share with me, even though you knew how to bake bread or challah, that had nothing to do really with studying and doing all the research that was necessary to go into creating the Showbread Institute and to learn the minute details and all that of how the Levites made the bread and all that. So first of all, share with us the research that you had to do in order to open up your institute.
Sure. So just 2 words before that, how I actually got to doing the research in the first place.
Okay.
So we opened up our bakery in 2008, and it had absolutely nothing to do with a temple whatsoever. It was just a mom and pop artisan bakery, baking home, handmade, organic, healthy breads and baked goods. And we were doing this for about 6 years. And being a baker in Israel was completely different to being a baker back in South Africa. Because in Israel, you don't only have South African Jews, you have Jews from 70 different countries from all around the world, from America to Australia to Europe to the Asia. And you have hundreds of different bread customs, which I had never encountered before in my life. And it was a kind of a awakening to all different kinds of Jewish bread customs from all over the world. And I became very interested in this whole topic, and I started researching the history and the customs, etc. And I very quickly came to the realization that what is now considered Jewish bread is actually mostly copies of other people's bread. They were not originally authentically Jewish. The only authentic Jewish bread that actually exists were the breads from the temple in the time of Solomon, from the tabernacle in the time of Moses. Those were the only breads that were authentically Jewish that had never existed in any other culture anywhere else in the world. So this is what originally got me interested in exploring more the temple breads. But the clincher of the whole thing is when I was one day selling bread in my bakery store, one of my customers came to pick up their challah order for Friday, and he showed me this book written by a professor from Bar Ilan University. His name is Professor Zohar Amar, and he's the Dean of Land of Israel Studies in Bar Ilan University. And he did a study about the showbread, and he wrote a little book about it. And he actually is the first person in the last 2,000 years to try experiment to actually reproduce the showbread. Until 2,000 years ago, the topic of the showbread is being purely theoretical. It's discussed in all the different Jewish works, like in the Talmud and the Mishnah and the commentaries, but nobody actually physically went into the lab and tried to bake it and try reproduce it until this professor. So he got me completely hooked on the subject. I looked at the back of his book. He had little pictures of the results of his experimentation. And to be totally honest, they were not the greatest looking breads that I'd ever seen. He's a botanist by profession. He's not a professional baker. So his baking efforts weren't spectacular. So I contacted him and I told him what I did. I'm a professional baker. And I asked him if he would be interested in collaborating on this project together. Maybe I can help improve the quality of the results of the bread. And that was about a decade ago. And since then, we've been collaborating very closely together, using our bakery as a laboratory, trying to reproduce all the breads from the temple, most prominently the showbread, which is the most complicated of all of them.
So, okay, so first of all, let's unpack some of this, because you had taught me last night when we were talking. So the showbread also has another name. You call it matzah. Matzah we know as unleavened bread, which we all have on Passover, but yet it was also matzah for the showbread. Could you share something about that? Because
Sure.
We don't know about that.
Okay, so leavened bread was not one of the favorite breads in the temple. It was actually frowned upon to use leaven in the temple. There's an actual a command that forbids bringing leaven onto the altar in the temple. You're not allowed to offer an offering in the temple that contains any leavened dough or leavened bread. There are only 2 exceptions in the temple that have leavened breads. The one is the 2 loaves offering on the festival of Shavuot, or the festival of Pentecost. That is a leavened bread made from sourdough. And the second one is from the Thanksgiving offering. One of the many, many breads of the Thanksgiving offering has a leavened bread, a risen bread also made from sourdough. But there are only 2 exceptions. The majority of the breads in the temple are non-leavened breads, which are equivalent to matzah. They don't have any yeast in them. They don't have any rising agent that makes them rise. They're usually flatbreads, most of them, with the exception of the showbread. The showbread is a kind of an anomaly in the temple breads because on the one hand, it is a matzah, it's a non-leavened bread, but it's a very thick bread. It's a thickness of 4 fingers high. And the interesting thing about it is that before it is baked, the beginning thickness is 1 finger in height, but when it is baked, after it is baked, it rises to the thickness of 4 fingers. It's called a handbreadth, Hebrew a tefach, a handbreadth high. And in other words, this bread is a non-leavened bread that has to rise. And the question is how you make a non-leavened bread rise. What kind of method do you use to make a non-leavened bread rise? And that was one of the most challenging mysteries to try solve with the showbread. We spent almost 2.5 years trying to figure out the technique and the ingredients and the method of how to make this work and not make it a leavened bread, technically speaking.
Wow. How much did one of those showbreads weigh?
So first of all, there were 12 of them on the table. There were 12 loaves altogether on the table, each representing one of the 12 tribes. And each of the loaves weighed about 8 kilos. 8 kilos is about almost 20 pounds for the Americans in the audience. It's a very, very big and heavy loaf.
And the Levites would make these. The Levites made them every Friday, and the Kohanim, the priests, would eat that. Could you share a little bit about that, how that worked?
So the showbread offering was a weekly offering. Every Friday, the day before the Jewish Sabbath, they would bake a set of 12 fresh loaves, which they would then rest them overnight for the switch on the golden table the following day on the Sabbath day is when they switched the previous week's bread with the freshly baked new bread. And the Levites were the ones who baked the bread. They were the expert bakers in the temple, as you correctly read from Chronicles 1. The Levites were the expert bakers, not the priests. But the priests were the ones who they did the actual ritual. They did the switching of the bread on the golden show table. And they were also the ones who ate the bread after the ritual had ended. So that was the allocation of tasks between the baking and the performance. Was between the baking was the Levites and the performance was the priests. So the Levites used to bake 12 fresh breads every Friday. They would prepare them at the entrance to the inner sanctuary on Friday night. And the following day on the Sabbath day, they would do a switch, replacing the previous week's bread with 12 new loaves of fresh bread. And according to the Jewish commentaries and sources, they say that the bread, when it was removed a week later from the golden table, it was as fresh and warm as if it had come out of the oven that day. They say it is a miracle, one of God's miraculous feats in the temple, that the bread remained fresh for an entire week on the golden table. After they'd removed the previous week's bread and put the fresh new 12 loaves on the table, the priests were then allowed to partake of the previous week's bread. They divided up between all the priests. It was approximately 5 in the time of the Second Temple, for example. There was about 500 priests dividing up these 12 loaves. They were huge, enormous loaves indeed, but 12 loaves between 500 people. Each priest ended up only getting a small portion of the bread, about the size of an egg. But one of the commentaries say that it was another miracle in the temple, that even though it was a very small size, it filled them up as if they'd eaten an entire meal. They compare it to the manna that the children of Israel ate in the desert in the 40 years that they were in the desert with Moses. They compared the showbread that had similar properties to the manna.
That's interesting. So we call it the showbread, and in Hebrew it's actually Lechem HaPanim, and Panim means face. Is there a reason why we don't call it then the bread, the face, the bread with face or something like that? Why showbread versus Lechem HaPanim? Or what does the HaPanim mean spiritually?
So the English term for the bread is the showbread, alludes to the fact that it was a display bread. It was displayed in front of the Lord, in front of God in the temple. That is the meaning of the word showbread, alludes to that aspect of it. But the The bread had many aspects to it, besides the fact that it was a display bread. It was also a kind of a secret weapon, if you want to call it. The showbread was an amazingly powerful weapon in the temple, because the purpose of the showbread in the temple was to channel all the heavenly abundance from heaven down to this earth, and it was all done through the showbread. The showbread was a blessing for material wealth and abundance. So all the heavenly abundance was channeled through the 12 loaves of bread on the table and distributed to all corners of the world in the form of natural resources like rain, like natural produce growing in the fields, like minerals, like oil, like money, like the stock exchanges all over the world, if you think of it in those terms, was all originated through the showbread on the table in the temple. That was the source of all the material wealth in the world. So whoever controlled that aspect of the temple had enormous power, because they held the world global economy basically in their hands. So that was one of the other aspects of the showbread, is that it was a conduit for material abundance. The name of the bread, the Lechem HaPanim, the face bread, there's a number of explanations why it was called the face bread. That's the literal translation of Lechem HaPanim. It means bread of the face. One explanation said that the bread had many angles and many sides to it. In other words, it faced different directions, many directions, was facing in different directions. So it was called the face bread, that was facing in many directions. Another explanation is actually one of the explanations that we uncovered in our research here in our institute, is that the shape of the bread resembles very much a kind of a smiling mouth, a kind of a smiley. And if you combine that with another element that was on the golden table, there were 2 bowls of frankincense together with the 12 loaves of bread on the showbread table. And if you look at the bread in conjunction with the 2 bowls of frankincense, the 2 bowls of frankincense very closely resemble eyes. And the showbread, which is a kind of a curved U shape, resembles a smiling mouth. That was probably the first smiley emoticon ever in the history of man. According to Wikipedia, the earliest archaeological finding of a picture depicting a smiling face was something called the Hittite jar. It was I think it was a remnant of a jar of wine from the 14th century BC, and they say that is the oldest archaeological artifact of a picture of smiling face. But actually, the showbread, if you looked at the showbread, that was the first. It predated the Hittite pot. Basically, that was the first symbolic pictorial depiction of a smiling face. It was in the tabernacle of Moses.
That's cute. Let me ask you something. I know that today, when we all prepare our Shabbat challah, when we make challah for Shabbat, which most people know, we use 2 Friday night, 2 for lunch, and many people 2 for the third meal also. It's symbolic of the double portion that God gave us in Sinai. When we make our challahs, we have a bracha, we have a blessing that we do say in terms of preparing the bread and taking from it. Is that the same blessing that they would have said then, the Levites, or is it different blessings that they said while preparing the showbread?
So the blessing that we say today when we eat bread, we bless God who brings bread forth from the earth. That is the syntax of the blessing. Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, who brings bread out of the earth. When the Israelites were in the desert and they were getting the manna, the syntax was a little different. It was hamotzi lechem min hashamayim, that they were blessing God who gave them bread from heaven. So it's a very interesting question what the priests in the temple made the blessing on the showbread. It was very likely that it was a blessing from the earth, because in fact the bread, although it had many spiritual properties, it was baked from flour which was made from wheat, which was harvested from the earth. So it's very likely that the blessing made on the showbread was the identical blessing that we make today on the Sabbath challahs.
when we bake our challah, the dough, we say a bracha, and we also take some dough and we're supposed to throw it away. Can you explain that symbolism, please?
Yeah, sure. So the procedure is called separating challah. When a Jewish person makes bread, you have to bring 2 tithes from the bread. The first bread is when you harvest the grains from the field. You have to give a tithe. It's a kind of a gift to the priests from the actual grain harvest. That is the first gift to the priest that comes from the actual grain. And God instituted a second gift from the actual dough of the bread. It's the only food that has a double gift. For example, wine, if you make wine, you don't have to give a gift on the grapes and again on the wine, a second gift. The only gift that you give a double gift is bread. And the commentators asks why specifically bread has an extra gift. And the reason given is because it was such a ubiquitous operation. People made bread every single day. And God wanted to give the children of Israel as many merits as possible by having them perform as many commandments as possible. So by performing this ritual of taking the separation of the little piece of dough from the daily bread, they got a lot of merits by doing that action. So that is the reason for the extra commandments specifically for the bread. The actual procedure, actually, when you mix the dough, what you do is at the end of mixing the dough, you simply detach about an egg volume piece of dough from the main dough. And in the time of the temple, that was given to the priests who ate the piece of dough. They would bake it and they would eat it. That would be their morning bagel or whatever kind of bread they were making in their kitchen. Obviously, today we don't have the temple, and priests are today not allowed to eat the special piece of dough, because to be a priest like that they were in the temple, you had to go through a series of purification processes, which we don't have today. For example, being sprinkled with the ashes of the red heifer. We don't have these purification. So we don't have priests today who are spiritually pure, that they are entitled to eat this piece of dough. So
Eliezer, I know that this sounds like a lecture series you're giving. It's totally, totally amazing. We're almost running out of time. And I did want to ask you, you are working on a book, and I know we had a question in down also about this. And so I wanted to ask you, please share with us about your book and when that will be published.
Sure. So as I said, I've been researching all the different Jewish breads from around the world since we began our bakery. Hundreds of breads from all different cultures, from the Sephardi cultures, from the Ashkenazi cultures, from even from Hong Kong. We have a Jewish bread tradition from Hong Kong. And I took all this research that I'd been doing for over a decade since we started the bakery, and I turned it into a book, which has been searching for a publisher for a very, very long time. And finally, in 2019, we found a publisher, and we were all gung-ho to get the book published. And then along came Corona and put a spanner in the works and delayed the whole thing for about 2 years. And then finally we got ready to publish the book. And then the October 7th came along and put another spanner in the works. So the whole thing's been delayed. It was ready for publication already in 2019, but it's taken a while to actually get to the final stage. And thank God we're already there. And hopefully it's going to be coming out in the next month or two. It's called the Jewish Bread Bible. And it's a history of bread from Adam and Eve to the present day in the prism of the Jewish tradition. That is the subject of the book. It's a very
amazing
book, and has a lot of recipes and all kinds of recipes from my bakery, professional baking recipes. So if anybody wants to know how to make professional challah or professional bagels, they have all the professional secret recipes from my bakery in this book.
So when the book comes out, we will send out information to all of our followers, and they'll get it. And to find out what that secret agent, we really have run out of time. But I think if anybody, Eliezer, if they would like to be in touch with you, they can contact you at the Showbread Institute, or they can contact me. And if it's okay with you, because I know there are a few questions we can't get to, if it's okay, they'll be in touch with you. Thank you so much. And everyone, thank you so much for joining us. And you should all have a blessed week. And if anyone's having challah this week, think of Eliezer and the Showbread Institute. And when you come to Israel, please come with us and we'll take you to the Institute, okay? Anyway, Melissa and Stephen, I don't know if you have anything to say real quickly.
Thank you so much, Eliezer. That was fascinating. And just reminding everybody, Stephen and I are going to be representing EMUNAH at an event coming up here over the next week or two. But we will be back for the next episode of the Christian Friends of EMUNAH webinar on Tuesday, the 3rd of March. So please tune into that. And Stephen also found a link where you can pre-order Eliezer's book, The Jewish Bread Bible, on Barnes and Noble. So check that out too, and definitely want to support him and read that book. It sounds amazing. Thank you so much, Ruth and Eliezer, and we'll see you on the 3rd of March.